Hey everyone, David here with your weekly Mouthful of David video. Before I get into the actual video though, just a heads up that our latest episode of A Mouthful of History is now out. And so this episode is about the history of the US frontier, both the history of the actual frontier itself, but then also kind of the idea that the frontier played in the minds of the average American, even those who didn't live anywhere near the actual frontier itself. And so we kind of delve into what the frontier meant for class relations, race relations, and just kind of general US society and culture, especially during the 1800s. I'm really proud of it, so please give it a listen if you can. Another announcement, we have a YouTube channel now, and you might be watching this on YouTube. If not, I'll have a link in the description on Facebook. And so if you have a YouTube channel, it'd be great if you could give us a sub. That'd be fantastic. Either way, thanks for listening, and hope you like the new episode. So, anyway, this week's question is from my friend on Twitter, actually, Chad Denton, so shout out to Chad. And I'm kind of paraphrasing the main idea of his question just to start things off, and then I'll get kind of deeper into what he asked more specifically later. But the kind of guiding question I'll be answering today is, are we better than the past? And it's a mistake that pretty much everyone in any time period has made, where they think that they're better than everyone who's come before them. And, in the modern day, we do have a lot of reasons to be proud. We talk about a lot of, social issues, a lot of issues of like power and marginalization that we have not necessarily talked about in a lot of societies before. But a lot of these things that we think have never been talked about before are actually things that have been talked about before. We'll get into those details a little bit later, though. Another thing to be proud of in the present, obviously, is our incredible sophistication of technology, which includes a lot of stuff that saves lives. Our modern medical system, for all its deep structural flaws, and especially its favoring of those who are incredibly wealthy. Despite those flaws, we have amazing medical technology available to us in the present. And so there are reasons to feel very prideful. But that being said, you still can't exactly think you're better than everyone who's come before you. And for kind of a couple reasons. And so this gets to a term that Chad mentioned in his original question, and that is the concept of chronocentrism, which kind of sounds like a cool Japanese RPG villain. But actually what it is the idea that your time period is better than anyone else's. And that doesn't really work because, first of all, there's the kind of standard answer that I'll just mention quickly. You can't judge the past by your present values, which I think is true, but I don't think that answer gets us anywhere because it doesn't encourage us to think about the past and study it too much, Something that I find kind of interesting, though, personally, is a lot of the values that we think are exclusive to the present are actually not. And so for kind of the rest of this video, I'll focus on gender. One thing Chad mentioned, though, that I think is worth mentioning here in the video is the idea, I'm going to get his exact words, actually, the idea that people couldn't have conceived of the idea of people being exclusively interested in the same sex until some 19th century Western scientists said it, which is pretty valid. For those who don't know, in a lot of different time periods throughout history, understandings of sexuality were not the same as, the very rigid, sometimes even puritanical understanding of heterosexual sexuality that was prevalent in United States and European society, especially in the 19th century and even the 20th century. And so that's, a really good example of how we think, we're more enlightened when it comes to questions of sexuality than in the past. But in reality, there have been different understandings of sexuality throughout history that include same-sex relationships, whether they're romantic or sexual or whatever else, being totally normal. And being normal in a way where they're not even seen as, progressive or rebellious or anything like that. They're just another way of conceiving of sexuality, just different than our own, or at least different from that of the 19th century. For the rest of this video, though, I'll kind of use gender as a guiding example, just so we can have a guiding through line when I talk about a couple of these points. So one thing to keep in mind is that progress really just generally is not a straight line. And what I mean by that is, it's not just a story of things gradually getting better as human history unfolds. And so 1,000 years ago, for example, in China, I believe it was during the Han Dynasty, but I could be mistaken. But regardless of which dynasty it was during, China actually had a female empress, Empress Wu Zetian. In ancient Sumer, so going even further back, thousands of years, they had a female ruler named Kubaba. And then, of course, there's ancient Egypt, which has had numerous female rulers. Even in more recent years, in the last 100 years, places that we would consider backwards have had female heads of state, when even here in the United States, we haven't had that yet. And in other parts of the world that consider themselves more advanced than other parts. So progress isn't just a straight line. And you could reasonably say in response to these examples of different female rulers that, they were just kind of tokens of leadership and they didn't really reflect greater societal values, which is, a fair point. Tokenism does not mean necessarily that there is, justice and acceptance and all that. But there are a lot of pieces of work, whether it's written records or cultural artifacts that show societal values and that kind of show different ways of conceiving of gender and conceiving of relationship between genders that are different from, again, we'll say 19th century Western Europe and the United States. So, for example, actually sticking with Europe, there was a work published right before the Renaissance, basically between the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance, in Europe by a woman named Christine de Pizan. And so she published a book called The Book of the City of Ladies. And so the premise of this book is this woman is visited by these three guardians of God, I guess you could say. I'm not 100% sure exactly what kind of beings they are. But basically this woman is, despairing because she lives in a society drenched with a lot of sexism. And not just her present society, but, reflecting on how a lot of very prominent writers have been sexist as well. And so these three guardians, I guess we'll call them, visit her, and they're female guardians / servants of God who basically tell her about all the accomplishments of different women throughout human history and say that they are going to build a society, a city, just for women, and they have chosen this main character as the architect. And this becomes such a huge hit that it really begins to bring into question not how sexist the society is necessarily, because she, wouldn't be writing such a strong book if there wasn't any sexism, but how many people were willing to listen, including prominent male figures of her day. A lot of other artists respected her immensely, her and her works. And so, this was in the... Man, I should have written down the details. I want to say 1400s, maybe 1500s when she published this. Hundreds of years ago. Basically half a millennia ago, right? And so this really kind of goes to show that challenging gender norms and even, writing a book where you're talking about building an entire society of women that becomes a very big cultural phenomenon, it kind of shows that our understandings of us being so much better and being able to conceive of things in ways that we think other times in history couldn't, isn't always true. And so don't always just assume, that things are better than they ever have been and that, we've never been less judgmental or more open-minded. That's not to say you should, feel ashamed of the time period you live in or anything like that. But also, don't think you're better than everyone. So that's this week's video, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you are all staying safe out there. Thank you for listening and have a good week. Catch you next time.